Our next presenter is Dyresha Harris, who earned her bachelor's with a double major in sociology and political science, and has just completed her MLA with certificate in urban studies. She's worked with a broad variety of young people, from suburban middle schoolers in Maryland to adjudicated teens in West Philadelphia, for over 10 years, and has published a study of youth culture in Hong Kong, China. She currently works full-time as the program coordinator for a Kensington Life Skills Education program at Congreso de Latinos Unidos. Harris has been trained in several different methods of diversity education and has been developing and presenting such programs for over 4 years as an employer of the University of Pennsylvania's Greenfield Intercultural Center, as a leader in its Race Dialogue project, and for other organizations outside of Penn. She will speak to us about her Capstone project, Getting to a House United, that was read by Sean Vereen, Nancy Waterson, and Howard Stevenson. Dyresha, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next page. So as mentioned, my capstone project was Getting to a House United, exploring intergenerational relations and prejudice against youth, otherwise known as adultism, in Black communities. Now, I did mine sort of as a creative capstone, which means part of it was creating a workshop, a dialogue about these issues that was held in April. It's a 2-day workshop. So being that I'm that kind of person, I'm going to want to try to get you a little bit engaged as well. So first, what I'd like us to do is just start off with a little visualization. If you want to just close your eyes and think back to being a kid, whatever music was popular at the time, whatever crazy outfits people were wearing, just kind of go back to that place. And I want to ask, do you remember hearing phrases like, "You'll do what I tell you," or "You're too young to have an opinion"? Oh, what, you think you're grown? Or the famous, "Because I said so." Do you remember being hit or humiliated as a punishment? What did it feel like? Or maybe you were the kind of young person who more often heard assertions like, "Oh, he's so smart for 15," or "She's so well behaved, she's just like a little adult." Or how about, "Ah, to be a kid again, you're so lucky you don't have to deal with any real problems." What did these phrases imply about what the normal intelligence was and conduct for your peers? What did it suggest about the struggles you were facing? Did you ever resent these comments and actions? Did you ever feel like they were unfair? Did you find yourself thinking, "I can't wait till I'm a grown-up so I can tell people what to do"? Or on the contrary, feeling later in life that you still didn't have a right to an opinion, or feeling intimidated by talking to groups of older people? If you answered yes to any of these, you are not alone. Many of the throwaway comments and actions of adults that adults use on us as youth have long-lasting effects, some of which were negative. Now, that's not to say that adults who cared for us weren't concerned with our well-being. Usually, we experience these incidents at the hands of well-meaning parents, teachers, youth workers, and community members who wanted what was best for us. Most times, they were just raising us in the ways they'd been raised and treating us the way society says youth should be treated. As I say this, I do want to let you all know, as was mentioned earlier, that I've worked with youth for 10 years. I'm an educator, and I've definitely done these things myself. So I know that a lot of times these issues will come up, and it's not about people being bad people. It's about, this is kind of how we've been trained to look at young people. Let's see. Get the change. So a lot of times when we hear these phrases and we see these actions, they are related to behaviors, attitudes, and systems that are based in the automatic assumption that adults are superior over youth. This is sometimes referred to as adultism. And in my capstone, I investigated the different ways that these work. Now, because of my own background and my work with adolescents, I focus specifically on inter-age relations between teens or young adults and older adults in African American communities. But many of the findings are applicable across the board. I took those findings and, as I mentioned, translated them into a 2-day workshop called A House United, which I put on in April to bring together Black adults and youth to talk about these issues. I then, in turn, included aspects of these discussions in my research. So I just want to take the next few moments to share a few of my findings. First, I'll argue that adultism is a form of oppression in the same way and same vein as the more widely recognized forms like racism, sexism, classism, etc. And let's see. Iris Marion Young, who is a political philosopher, professor, and activist, wrote an article called The 5 Faces of Oppression, in which she came up with some different definitions for what oppression is. And these were based on how it's been used in a lot of different movements, so it gave a pretty good broad range of methods that oppression can take. And so she looked at things like anti-racism movement, feminism, Marxism, and different movements like that. I found that all of these actually applied to adult-youth relationships. So here I'm just going to highlight a few. One that she mentioned was limited power, and she defined power as participating in making decisions that affect the condition of one's lives and actions. So it's obviously commonplace for young people to be told where they're going to live, what they'll study, what they'll wear, how they'll spend their free time, where they can go, who can they spend time with, and so on. Often they can't even eat or go to the bathroom without the permission of an adult. In fact, in his article, Understanding Adultism, John Bell, a professional in youth development with over 33 years of experience, notes that except for prisoners and a few other institutionalized groups, young people are more controlled than any other group in society. Now, obviously, some adult power over children is unavoidable. The problem comes when it's not used in the child's best interest, but rather to serve the adult's own agenda. So what's more convenient for us, what's more practical, what's going to fit into our schedule. Oftentimes, it's focused on obedience that goes beyond what is necessary and can actually encourage low self-esteem and a lack of faith in one's own abilities. Lower status of self and culture is another facet of oppression. And here a social scientist study by Saul Feynman and Richard Kuhn found that the participants that they asked to rate the prestige of children, adults, and the elderly consistently rated children the lowest, followed by the elderly and then adults. And it wasn't just the people as individuals, it was also activities that were associated with them. So when they're asked to rate behaviors that are associated with children, adults, and the elderly, they got the same results. So, you know, if you're comparing playing tag to going to a play to playing bridge, they would be ranked according to the ones that were more likely to be associated with those different groups. Furthermore, the status of a child went up for the most part when they did adult behaviors, whereas the status of the adult went down when they engaged in child behaviors. So you imagine finding out that a young person has written a book, their status goes up. You find out that an adult plays in a garage band, the status goes down. And this has been found in other groups where there is that kind of power dynamic. So for instance, oftentimes when women engage in activities that are typically men's activities, like knowing how to change a tire or knowing the rules of football, their status goes up. If a man engages in a woman activity such as learning how to crochet, the status goes down. So they found this relationship in other areas where there is this sort of power dynamic. And this is just a list of several other studies found similar results. The other area that you can see this, and this is an example that came from the workshop that I was with, is something as simple as culture like telephones. I had a young adult who was telling a story about going in to buy a telephone, and she wanted to buy a sidekick. So for those of you who know technology a little bit, a sidekick is typically geared towards, it's advertised for young people. And the attendant there told her, oh, you don't want to get a sidekick. If you bring that into a meeting, no one's going to take you seriously. Now, in the very same room, there was a teen who had gone in to buy a BlackBerry and had the attendant tell them, oh, what do you need a BlackBerry for? Don't you want to have fun? Why don't you get the sidekick? So there was this assumption both about, you know, oh, if you have something that's associated with kids, no one will take you seriously. And if you are a teen, then what could you possibly want to do that's serious? You should not need such a adult gadget like a BlackBerry. So another area of oppression is in stereotyping and lumping people together. So I open it up to you. So what are teens like? What do we know as a society? What do you hear that teens are like? What are some adjectives that describe teenagers?
Moody.
Moody? Uh-huh. Anything else?
Fearless.
Fearless?
Unruly.
Unruly? Couple more.
Disrespectful.
Disrespectful. Okay, good. So there are a lot of them out there. These images are actually, I just Googled Google images for youth culture, and this is what came up. And so there are a lot of different stereotypes that are out there about teens. And you can see, actually I was reading a sociologist, Mike Males, who has several articles on such topics, and he writes, a survey of stories in popular press on the teenage brain and risk found reporters and commentators, including experts, lambasting teens as reckless, stupid, irrational, callous, lazy, violent, and even alien. Now, Bazemore and Terry, who do work with youth in the criminal justice system, talk about how the system is really set up to look at youth as either victims or villains. And I think this can go beyond just criminal justice system. We can see that often those stereotypes are either about them being so stupid or so impressionable that they just fall victim to whatever's in front of them, if it's violent movies or rap songs or whatever, or it's that, you know, these kids today just don't know anything, they're so irresponsible, they're so disrespectful, and they're really villains. So those are the two camps that they kind of fall into. And then there's also this idea about them being kind of crazy. Like there's a lot of literature coming out right now talking about teen brain development, but really putting it in this framework of, you know, that teens are mentally ill, that for that period of time, you're just clinically insane, and that's what defines being a youth. And in terms of lumping people together, you'll often see that it's not uncommon for a whole classroom to be kind of lumped together in terms of their behavior. So it's not uncommon for a whole group of kids to be chastised for the actions of one. And, you know, we sort of picture that with adults, right? Like, what if we take this room, for example, and I notice that there's someone in the back who's texting right now. If you actually are, I didn't notice, I'm just using example. And so what if I were to say, you know, I think that's rude and I'm angry about it, so no more snacks for anybody. I hope you got some of those little bean wraps earlier because we're not having any more. And, you know, I'm sorry to do this to you, but it's just based on your behavior. I have no choice. And that's something that happens a lot with young people. And if you were someone up here in the front who is listening carefully, that doesn't matter. You still don't get any more cannolis or anything else that's back there. When I was training to be a tutor, actually, I had someone tell me to be careful in the classroom because the youth can smell blood. No, they can smell fear, I'm sorry. Coming into a Philadelphia public school, I was told that we would be delayed because the students were on lockdown. I had one teacher describe the research she did in her classroom as being practical because it came from the trenches. And all of these statements came from people who were committed, thoughtful adults working with youth. And it just shows how common these stereotypes are that kind of use these images that are animalistic or related to prison, warfare metaphors, especially when we're talking about youth of color. Another form of oppression is segregation, and here we can see lots of different places where young people actually aren't allowed. And this isn't just sort of looking at the over 18 section of the video store. This is places like banks, I think there's a hairdresser, galleries. And when we did the workshop, actually, people were kind of laughing when they saw this part. It was sort of like, oh, no kids allowed. But then it got a lot more quiet when I showed this one, which illustrates an adult-only sign on a restroom juxtaposed with the whites-only sign from a water fountain in the 40s. And you can really see that there are some parallels here about who gets to be full citizens and who are second-class citizens. So imagine that you saw a sign in a store that said only 3 Mexicans may enter at a time, or a sign that said Jews must have a guardian to enter, or black men must buy something after 15 minutes or leave the premises. We would find all of these very offensive, but I've seen each of these signs in stores with regard to youth. Even when there aren't signs, they're often greeted with suspicious looks, they're followed around, and made to feel uncomfortable in places where they don't belong. And in my research, I examined a number of different effects that the experience of adultism had on young people. And there's one that I just want to highlight because of my interest in diversity work and how it relates to, particularly to people of color. So here we have a quote: bullies have been bullied, abusers have been abused, people who have been put down put others down. If a person had not been disrespected and mistreated over and over again as a child and a young person, that person would not willingly accept being treated that way as he or she got older, nor would he or she willingly heap disrespect on others. Very similar to a hip-hop line that I like, which is this thin line between a chipped tooth and a fang. So oftentimes what we put out is what we end up getting back with young people. This is sort of the first place where young people learn this idea of power over others, or that if you're in this category, you get to say what's right, and these other people don't. And people on the front lines of youth work, diversity education, lots of youth psychologists and youth development professionals are now starting to see this link between adultism and people who either perpetrate other kinds of oppression or are the victims of other kinds of oppression later in life. So for instance, the Philadelphia Police Department is now putting out these warnings letting people know that oftentimes young people who come from really domineering households are at more risk of being victims of sexual predators because there is this idea that they haven't learned how to say, I have boundaries, or how to tell adults that's not okay with me. And this is obviously not to blame parents for their kids being victims of predators, but it is this idea that we're setting up this precedent that, that young people don't get to make choices about their bodies and their lives. So here you can see how it kind of goes either way. You often see you'll see kids telling younger children, you know, well, you have to do what I say because I'm older, or I don't have to listen to you because you're not grown. So if we want kids to show each other respect, we really have to be thinking about how we're showing them respect. And educator Ann Bishop writes about how young people faced with adultism usually respond with one or more of the following. Either they internalize it, like saying, oh, well, you know, I am actually stupid or selfish, I'm embarrassing, I'm unimportant, I'm weak, whatever. Manipulating it, so figuring out how to say and do what the adult or the person in power wants enough to appease them, or lashing out, talking back, taking it out on smaller or younger kids, or grabbing any power they can because they haven't been given this power, and so they got to take it. And I think all of us know adults who are still carrying around these patterns. These are things that don't actually go away when the young people grow up oftentimes. And you'll see the adults who are apologizing for everything all the time, who are doubting themselves all the time. You'll see adults who kind of figure out how to situate themselves vis-a-vis people in power who are enablers. And you'll see the adults who are kind of in that place of, you know, that's never going to happen to me again. You know, I suffered through this and now I'm on top, so, you know, I'm going to make them go through it too. And adultism kind of prepares us for other oppression. So it, as I mentioned, it kind of starts this power over relationship. It teaches people that you can have control over someone else purely because of a characteristic they can't change. In this case, it's age, but that could easily be applied to other characteristics like race, gender, class, and religion. The good news is that researchers have also found that the opposite is true. So when we get kids out of adultist environments, it could lead to young people who are stronger and more empowered than anything we've ever seen. I mean, we've all grown up in societies with adultism and sort of had ourselves shut down in certain ways because of that. And there's a lot of research now in terms of youth development that's looking at taking that villain or victim perspective and changing it into a resource perspective, where we're looking at what intelligence do these young people bring to the table, what skills do they have, how are they resources for their communities, and lots of different organizations that are getting young people involved in this. And there have been studies that show that, studies done on what they call allies, so people who have taken up causes that they're not actually a part of. So, you know, white people against racism, or men standing up against domestic violence, things like that. And they've found that those people, there's a big correlation between a democratic household in terms of the power dynamics between the adults and the youth, and them deciding to do that. And in some of my own research that I've done with allies, there have been all but one of the people I talked about how their first moments as allies, the first time that they realized they could make a change in the world, was often in their own families when they talked to their parents. Maybe it was over dinner about a comment that they heard somebody in the family say, and actually had that parent respond, had that adult reflect on what they were talking about and take them seriously, and that was what showed them, hey, I can actually make a difference, like I can influence people, and that was really empowering for them. So I think it's exciting to think about all this new research that's been done and to think about where we can go with that. And for anyone who's interested in continuing this conversation, that's what I'm all about, which is why I had the workshop. You can email any questions if you want to read the full report or share any comments to thisunitedhouse@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and perspectives on it.
Thanks, Dyresha. Does anybody have any questions for Dyresha about her project, her research, or what she's doing next?
What was the toughest thing you, I think we just looked at last week, was the toughest adultist issue that you confronted?
In terms of my personal experience or in doing that?
Yeah, it was, it might either, or professionally or personally. It's interesting.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it comes down on young adults in certain ways that are a little bit different than teens and young people. I think you see adultism for young adults more in the workplace in terms of, for instance, I work in a nonprofit, and I hate to say that I've heard numerous times employers talking about, oh, we're a little low on funds, let's get some college students because they work for cheap. You can get a lot out of them. We'll play on their passion, their excitement. They don't say it like that, but it's very much like, we can get a lot out of them. They're very excited. They'll work the long hours. So I think that's more how it comes down on young adults. I think in talking about young people, especially in Black communities, that some of the hardest stuff that comes up is feeling like they don't have support and trust from Black adults. That there's a way that it's kind of expected when it's coming from outside of the community, but that divide between the adults and youth within the community feels very hard and feels like betrayal in some ways.
Lee?
How American do you think this is? I mean, have you had any sense of the research talking about adultism in other cultures?
Well, I think it definitely plays out in specific ways in America, and my research was looking at kind of historically the issues that African Americans have faced in this country. So from that perspective, I think it's very American. But in terms of the children's rights and youth rights movement, it's actually much bigger in Europe and parts of Eastern Europe. There have been huge social movements of youth. There are even homes that youth have created that are just run by young people, and in parts of Britain and other places in the world, I think because of the social movements, like South Africa, for instance, where there are lots of young people in social movements, I think that they have gotten that sense of empowerment and then turned around and looked at, okay, we were fighting apartheid, but wait, there's this other thing that we're also facing that has to do with our age. So I think it is global in many places.
So maybe young people don't have the space here to do that as effectively in the U.S. Do you think that's true? I don't know. I mean, there's a space to create these kind of youth-directed movements, associations. I don't know. We're thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's starting.
Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.